A very warm welcome live here at the IUCN World Conservation Congress in Marseille. Welcome everybody here present. Welcome everybody watching on the live stream. Welcome to the Dutch Caribbean Night. We have a wonderful program. You'll hear about the Dutch Caribbean, but before I'll briefly say something about the Dutch National Committee of the Netherlands, which are hosting this session. IUCN has 40 members in the Netherlands, and most of them are focusing on nature conservation in the Dutch mainland or internationally. But tonight we focus on special members that take care of nature within the Dutch kingdom in the Dutch Caribbean. The Netherlands is a beautiful country, beautiful nature, beautiful seas, beautiful dunes, beautiful meadows, temperate climates, Atlantic, European climates for large parts. But we also have the privilege of exotic parts of the country, of the kingdom, with very special biodiversity, and some of which you will hear more about. Endemic species, beautiful tropical parts of biodiversity, and that's what this night is all about. We will learn about nature conservation on the 6 islands, and we will zoom in on one island in particular, the island of Bonaire. Before I introduce the speakers to you, just want to say that there can be questions through the live stream, so please do so, and we will try to accommodate them in the session. If you have any questions, please ask. The only thing is I propose to have all questions together after a series of presentations. So please hold your question, and I will definitely come back to you for a question and answer with the different speakers. Afterwards, and this is unfortunately only for the people present here in Marseille, everybody is invited for drinks and some finger foods to complete this Dutch Caribbean night. So please stay also with us after the presentations. We have a wonderful set of speakers. And I'm particularly honored to announce the Lieutenant Governor of the island of Bonaire to be with us here today. We also have the Director of the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, IUCN member, and we have the Director of STINAPA from Bonaire, Jan van der Ploeg. And we have a last speaker from STINAPA also, Roxanne Francisca. We'll hear from them in different order. But before we do so, we would like to listen to a word of welcome through a video recording previously by the governor of the island of Sint Maarten, His Excellency Eugène Holiday.
Dear participants and delegates to the IUCN World Conservation Congress. It is with great pleasure that I deliver these brief remarks for the Dutch Caribbean Night at the IUCN Netherlands Pavilion. While I would have preferred to address you in person, I am happy to bring you warm greetings from Sint Maarten's rich natural environment, and at the same time, in part, showcase the subject of Dutch Caribbean conservation initiatives. The Dutch Caribbean is the biodiversity hotspot for the Kingdom of the Netherlands, with some of the most beautiful, best run and well managed protective areas in the region. There is a concerted effort, especially through the supporting efforts of the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, to ensure that the protected areas are sufficiently managed to conserve and protect the biodiversity of the Dutch Caribbean. However, as is the case with so many around the world, conservation efforts have been made more challenging by the effects of the coronavirus pandemic. The pandemic has led to a drop in park visitations, resulting in a significant strain on the financial continuity of the parks that depend heavily on a user fee model for sustainable financing. This, in addition to the significant impacts of climate change, of which we in the Caribbean are on the front line. We, however, remain optimistic because in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. We have all heard of the effects the lockdown has had on nature, with ecosystems and species recovering after a short period of time.
Thank you very much. As the governor makes very clear, there are specific challenges when it comes to nature conservation in this part of the kingdom, on these islands. There's climate change, there's all kinds of pressures of invasive species, and we will learn much more about this. And I think I have the pleasure to now introduce His Excellency, the Lieutenant Governor of the island of Bonaire, Edison Reina.
Thank you, Konrad. Bon tardi. That's in Papiamento, or local language, a good afternoon to all. I'm most happy and proud to be here today in order to speak about nature conservation on my island, and especially today. Today is September 6th. It's a festive island day on the island, because in 1499, on this day, Bonaire was discovered. Normally, I would have been now in festivities on the island, but due to coronavirus, those festivities have been slowed down. And besides that, I think it's also important to be here today to show and explain to you how we in Bonaire are doing with nature conservation. Have been doing it for years already. So today we celebrate on one side, and I also want to inform you how we've been doing nature conservations. Allow me to address you in the following way. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to initiate by congratulating the International Union for Conservation of Nature to organize a conference like this every 4 years, where political leaders, policymakers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and conservationists from around the world come together to discuss the importance of nature conservation. As Lieutenant Governor of Bonaire, I am proud that my island can contribute to this program. Bonaire measures less than 300 square kilometers and has fewer than 22,000 inhabitants. We have been, since 2010, a special municipality of the Netherlands. Like I say, today is an official holiday for us, Dia de Bonaire. This is the day we celebrate the discovery of our island in 1499. Unfortunately, I have to miss the festivities, but on the other hand, like I said already, it's a very suitable day to speak to you about how special Bonaire is. Bonaire has been richly endowed by nature. Together with our other Caribbean sister islands, we are the most biodiverse part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. As small as we are home to multiple ecosystems, and in addition to our world-famous coral reefs, we also have mangrove forests, seagrass beds, brine lakes, and tropical dry forests. These systems are home to a huge variety of animals, from sea turtles, flamingos, to iguanas and bats. Home for now, ladies and gentlemen, I must add, because from the perspective of many animal species, the threats that they are facing are literally as large as life. The 30-30 initiative to make sure that at least 30% of all terrestrial and marine ecosystems in the world will be legally protected by 2030 is therefore an absolute necessity. I hope that all countries will do everything in their power to meet that standard in no later than 9 years. Ladies and gentlemen, laws and regulations alone will not save the planet. It is excellent that so many professionals who have a warm heart for nature are gathered here in Marseille, but that by itself is not enough. In order to turn the tide, we must convince those other 7 billion and more people who are not present here today. That way, we really have to change our attitude towards our Earth, and specifically towards nature. We have to make sure that it becomes part of our DNA, the DNA of the entire population of the world. Let Bonaire be a source of inspiration to this end. Bonaire may be a tiny speck in the Caribbean Sea, but we don't feel so small for big ambitions when it comes to nature conservation. Beginning with our earliest ancestors, our people have always lived with nature and they have learned to respect it. We grow up with nature and it has become an integral part of our genetic makeup from generation to generation. This explains why we were one of the first islands in the Caribbean to take active measures to protect nature. In 1969, we started to protect all sea turtles and banned spearfishing. Mind you, it's 1969. That year, we also designated several former colonial era plantations as Washington Slagbij National Park. In 1979, we declared all reefs around the island a protected area. 1979, ladies and gentlemen, which became the Bonaire National Marine Park. All in all, our nature reserves cover more than 30% of our island. So when it comes to the 30-30 initiative, Bonaire has already done its duty. But we're not going to sit back and just watch the rest of the world while they reach the same standard. Because I must admit that on Bonaire, nature is still under pressure. Wastewater threatens our fragile corals in our marine park. The plastic that is brought to us by oceans threatens the lives of sea turtles as they lay their eggs on our beaches. And then there are the effects of climate change that will have disastrous consequences for our nature if we do not take drastic measures. I am more concerned about this than about the risk that we will not be able to keep our feet dry to the predicted rise in sea level. After all, as we know, the Dutch know how to handle a rising sea. So being part of that kingdom, I don't think we have a big risk over there. Together, we can ensure that global warming is slowed down and preferably halted, ladies and gentlemen. Bonaire can't just blame climate change for the pressure on our island's nature, as it is also partly due to tourism. As such, we are happy that people like to visit our island because this contributes to our prosperity and thus the well-being of our population. It also generates income, which we use to protect our nature. A few years ago, we realized that we needed to shift the focus of tourism from quantity to quality tourism. Not more and more tourists, but different tourists. Tourists who will come to Bonaire not only to lie on the beach in the sun, but tourists who appreciate our unique nature. In the context of transition from mass to quality tourism, we also choose to adjust the number of cruise ships to be more in keeping with what our island is able to accommodate. This may initially cost us some income, but continuing as we have done previously will ultimately turn out to be much, much more expensive. I dare to say that on Bonaire, we were already working on sustainability long before the word was commonly established. We recently have translated it into what we call the blue destination concept. This sets out ambition to realize a circular economy. Companies, including hotels, are encouraged to pursue an active sustainability policy. A ban on single-use plastics will soon be introduced. We strive for a society without waste. We have banned components of sunscreen that are harmful to corals. Our energy company plans to make electricity production 80% greener within 2 years. We will also actively encourage electric transport, both on land, in the air, and on the water. And last but not least, we are considering bringing new areas of nature value under legal protection. One of the challenges we face, ladies and gentlemen, however, protecting our nature is stray goats. We have like 30,000 of those on the island. They literally eat up nature and by doing so cause erosion. This is why the island governor, together with nature organizations, is actively trying to solve the problem, and we are taking the first steps in this direction in Washington's Slagbai Park. One of our biologists, Roxanne Francisca, will tell you more about this shortly. Protecting nature is hard work, but sometimes it comes naturally. Nature may also emerge by accident. Since 2011, we have a wastewater treatment plant, which was funded by the European Union. This is the first big step towards solving the problem of wastewater on our island. The recovery of our coral reefs depends on it. The purified wastewater is made available to our farmers, but at the moment, the amount of treated water exceeds the demand. So the surplus of gray water is pumped away in a remote corner of the site. And behind the scenes, a wetland has formed in just a few years. And this, in which turned out to be a great habitat for birds. There are even species that we have not seen on Bonaire before. Currently, we are looking at how to protect this area in such a way that it will remain accessible to bird watchers and scientific research. In my opinion, this accessibility, in an ecological responsible way, of course, is vital because it causes the public to support investment in nature conservation. This would not be possible should we put nature entirely under lock and key. Our marine park is an example of how the protection of corals goes hand in hand with the diving tourism. The fee that the divers pay is used to fund a coral restoration program. We do all these things in collaboration with a number of committed organizations, such as TINAPA and the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance. These organizations are achieving great successes on Bonaire. They will also be addressing you today, and I'm proud of the program they have organized for you and proud for the work they've been doing on our islands. Ladies and gentlemen, you may think that little island of Bonaire has nailed it, but you will not hear me say that. Okay, we're well on the way, but our goals is still a long way off. And let's be honest, we cannot do it alone. With the small community that we are, we do not have all the necessary expertise, the power to implement, and the financial resources to realize our mission of becoming a blue destination. In that way, my presence here today, and also to do a request on organizations in order to support and help us in this matter. And to those who want to see it before they believe it, I say you're more than welcome to visit us on the island to see it for yourself, what we have been doing the last 40 and 50 years in nature conservation. We still have the pristine blue sea with beautiful coral reefs in the Caribbean, and that is due to the fact that we started earlier. So there is hope, and I hope this inspires others to do as well. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward for questions later on. Thank you. I mentioned in my speech about the Washington Slagway National Park. We, together with SINAPA, we recently make a illustration of the park in a book, and I would like to present this book to Koenraad. This is a special edition of this book that I would like to hand over to you as a token, as appreciation for us here of Bonaire, that I may be able to deliver a speech here today. Thank you, and enjoy the book, and hopefully you will visit us to see all live in Bonaire. Thank you once again.
Thank you, His Excellency, for providing us with such a deep insight in the political and governance side of nature conservation at one of the islands. We'll hear now more about the total of the 6 islands, and it's a pleasure to me to introduce Mr. Tatio Bervoets, Director of the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, who will take us through the total of nature conservation at the Dutch Caribbean. Mr. Tatio Bervoets.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction as well. Before I start, I also would like to say, a very big thank you to IUCN NL for actually giving us the opportunity to be here. When we found out that the conference was actually happening in person, we were very excited that we had the opportunity to organize or be part of organizing an event here. So we're privileged and honored to be here, and I look forward to carrying the attendees through what is home, basically. So you will click through the slides. All right, so my presentation is going to be about DCNA, about the network. As a background, the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance is a network organization. So we are an organization that supports all of the park management organizations in the 6 islands of the Dutch Caribbean. I will talk a little bit more about it later on, but we provide support through capacity. So project support, capacity building, et cetera, et cetera. But we also manage a conservation trust fund that is generously supported by the National Postcode Lottery. So thank you very much, Esme, for being here as well and for joining us on our session. And we can now go through the presentation. So next slide, please. So nature in the Dutch Caribbean. If you're not so sure where the Dutch Caribbean is, I'm very disappointed in you, but the Dutch Caribbean is in the Caribbean. And the unique part about it is that we are located, we actually spread out quite broadly in a geographical scale between the Northeastern and the Southern Caribbean. So in the Northeastern Caribbean, we have what we refer to as the SSS Islands, St. Martin, Saba, and St. Eustatius, which we affectionately call Statia. And then in the Southern Caribbean, we have the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. So next slide, please. Nature in the Dutch Caribbean, I mean, you've heard Koenraad mention it. You've heard the governor mention it, Governor Reina. The Dutch Caribbean is the biodiversity hotspot in the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And those biodiversity hotspots, the various ecosystems range from lush rainforests that we find on Statia and on Saba, for example. On Saba, the rainforest on Mount Scenery is the only rainforest within the Dutch Kingdom, just to further highlight how important the Dutch Caribbean is for the biodiversity in the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Next slide, please. We also have desert landscapes, especially on the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. They are more characterized by dry desert landscapes. So if you visited Bonaire, Aruba, or Curacao before, you know exactly what we're talking about. Next slide. Wetlands, dunes, and salinas. Next slide. Mangrove forests and seagrass beds. I want to take a little bit of a pause when we talk about, especially looking towards the future in the way that we finance nature conservation. I think we need to focus a little bit more on wetlands, mangroves, and seagrass beds for their potential as carbon offset. I think not enough attention is being placed on the importance of these ecosystems for carbon offset schemes. So this is a little bit of a highlight that I want to put there so that we can increase the work that we're doing through self-financing our own nature conservation work through these carbon offset schemes. Next slide, please. The famous coral reefs. You know, much has been said about the coral reefs on Bonaire. It is really one of the top coral reefs on Earth. I mean, if you compare it to the rest of the Caribbean, there's very few places that are as beautiful as the reefs of Bonaire. Maybe East Point in Curacao. But we've also have, in the Northeastern Caribbean, we also have the marine parks of Saba, which is also a very well-known diving destination, the Saba Marine Park, but also the Marine Park of St. Eustatius, which I used to manage in a previous life. And of course, the Marine Park on St. Martin as well, which I also used to manage in a previous life. Next slide, please. Also, Koenraad also mentioned it, we are an area of high endemism. So we have a significant amount of endemic species that call the 6 islands home. 200 species of endemics. They are as odd as marine snails, which we have 57 species that can only be found in the Dutch Caribbean. And the list goes down all the way to you know, reptiles, for example. I have a slide, it's not a very positive one, you'll see it in a bit, about the rattlesnake. Aruba has an endemic species of rattlesnake. It's hot in here. Next slide, please. And then again, not to belabor the point, but just to emphasize, it is the biodiversity hotspot within the Dutch Caribbean. Next slide. So we manage those biodiversity hotspots. It is really hot. I need to wipe my face. Thank you. I got it. So we manage these biodiversity hotspots, but particularly through protected area and protected area management. So I'll go through the various protected areas. This is not a list in terms of my favoritism. It is alphabetically done. So we'll start with Aruba. So Aruba has the Arari National Park, and recently they've also established, thank you so much, thank you. Recently we've also established the Marine Park. So the Aruba National Park, so the terrestrial park, Arari National Park and the Aruba Marine Park are managed by the Aruba National Parks Foundation. Next slide, please. Bonaire, I'm not going to spend much time on Bonaire because we have Jan and Roxanne that are going to take you specifically onto Bonaire. But Bonaire, the Washington Slagbaai National Park and the Bonaire Marine Park is managed by Stinapa. Next slide, please. Curacao, thank you, sir. Curacao, we have the Christoffel Cheteboka Park, and also recently, brand new, they're still in process of putting together the management plan, is the Curacao marine park, which will be along the east coast of Curacao. Next slide. St. Eustatius has the Quail-Boven National Park and also the St. Eustatius Marine Park, and it is managed by an organization called STENAPA, not to be confused with STINAPA. Next slide, please. The Ceiba National Park, which has the Mount Scenery National Park and the Ceiba Muriel Thistle National Terrestrial Park. They came up with a very complicated name for that. And of course, the Ceiba National Marine Park, which is managed by the Ceiba Conservation Foundation. Next slide. And then, okay, I'll pull some favoritism here. My favorite marine park, because I'm born and bred from St. Martin, is the Man of War Shoal Marine Protected Area. Unfortunately, St. Martin is the only island that does not have a terrestrial protected area, but we do have a marine park. Next slide. Not only do we focus quite significantly on protected area management, but we're also involved in scientific research. Lately, Roxanne and I just returned back from the Ceiba Bank where we were tagging tiger sharks. That's a tiger shark. And one of the reasons why we focus specifically on tiger sharks is, you can go to the next slide. And this is supposed to be a video. One of the reasons why we focus on tiger sharks is because they are a species that traverses the whole Caribbean area. So this is a tiger shark that we tagged on the Ceiba Bank, and eventually it made its way all the way down to the north coast of Venezuela. So we're using the species as a way to tie in not only the Dutch Caribbean, but to highlight the fact that, you know, there's connectivity between the various ecosystems in the wider Caribbean Sea. So we're really trying to focus our conservation efforts on a broader scale, to not just focus specifically on certain islands, but also to bring that conservation to the wider Caribbean area. So this one was tagged in 2016. And the last position that it gave was a couple of years ago. Next slide, please. We also had a shark conservation project, which was called Shark Strong. We had scientific research, also policy briefs, but we also had quite a bit of nature and education associated with the program, which eventually, next slide, please, which eventually resulted in the establishment of the Arari Sanctuary. The Arari Sanctuary, it's a Taino word, which means fine place. Taino are the original inhabitants of the Caribbean before colonial days. And the Arari Sanctuary was established specifically to protect sharks and marine mammals. Next slide, please. We also do quite a bit of work on sea turtle conservation. There are different organizations that work with sea turtles. On Bonaire, for example, sea turtle conservation is done by a separate organization than STINAPA, but on the other islands, it's also a part of the work that's being done by the national parks. So this is supposed to be a video as well. So this is just one of the hatchlings that we were able to remove from a beach that was highly impacted. It was a very famous, a very well-used tourist beach on St. Martin. And previously, some of the nests were damaged by umbrellas that were stuck in the sand, broke open the eggs, and we lost quite a bit of nests. So whenever a turtle would lay on that beach, luckily for me, that used to happen at like 4 o'clock in the morning, I had to wake up and transplant the nest to a more suitable location. Next slide, please. I mean, I'll give you two guesses where this video is from. Of course, the famous flamingos on Bonaire. Also an emblematic species, Bonaire has the largest breeding population of flamingos in the Western Hemisphere, if I'm not mistaken. So it's also an area very important for global conservation. Next slide, please. This is my favorite animal in the Dutch Caribbean. Curacao is actually home to an endemic deer species. It's a type of white-tailed deer. It's a subspecies. They're about this big, so that they're able to walk through all the tuna cactuses, which is not my favorite. But it's also a very unique species that can only be found on the small island of Curacao, believe it or not. Next slide, please. Not only is nature important for nature's sake, I mean, we're all nature conservationists, but we love nature intrinsically. But we also want to emphasize the importance of nature conservation in terms of the contribution to the economies. This is a study that was done on St. Eustatius, for example, for the marine park, which shows that this area in particular, the dark blue area, which coincidentally or not, probably not, is the reserve. So it's the highly protected area of the marine park in Statia, and it contributes more than 100,000 per hectare a year to the economy of St. Eustatius. Next slide, please. And the same, of course, goes for terrestrial habitats. It's also a study that we did. This here, it's not a volcano that's erupting, but it is a volcano. It is the Quill National Park, and it also contributes about 160,000 per year, just that particular ecosystem to the economy of St. Eustatius. And we did similar studies for all 6 islands in the Dutch Caribbean. Next slide, please. So the most critical issues, of course, Corona crisis, like Hazak mentioned, like Governor Diana mentioned, we finance nature conservation through a user fee system. And during the pandemic, when there was no travel and everything was locked down, we found that there was a significant drop in the financing of the parks because there was no users to buy any user fees. So that was a significant issue that we've had to bridge. Of course, biodiversity loss, it's happening all over the world. Previous slide. We have some issues related to governance. I'll get into that a little bit later. Access to sustainable and structural financing for conservation. But the biggest issue, and I'm happy that September 6th is now a more positive day for me, because September 6th, since 4 years, next slide, was when that happened. So the most critical issue for us is and will be in the future the impacts of climate change. This is Hurricane Irma. Right in the middle of the eye of Hurricane Irma is St. Martin, and we're still recovering from what was a very unusual, rapid intensifying storm that we have not seen before. As Governor Holliday mentioned, we in the Caribbean are on the front line of climate change. I had a meeting a few weeks ago where representatives from the Netherlands were lamenting the impacts of the rainstorms that happened just a few weeks ago. And I was like, well, welcome to our world as Caribbean people. We live in that fear for 6 months out of every year, especially in the Northeastern Caribbean. Next slide, please. It's supposed to be a video just to highlight how intense living through a Category 5 hurricane with winds up to 450 kilometers per hour can actually be. Next slide. But the issue of climate change is not only related to the Northeastern Caribbean, it's also in the Southern Caribbean. For example, on Bonaire, again, I won't focus on it too much because Jan and Rox will, zoom in on that a little bit more. But this is an issue related to sedimentation and wastewater on Bonaire. But I won't steal the thunder from the Sinapa folks. Next slide, please. And then also specific to species, this is a sea turtle infected with a disease called fibropapilloma. It's a herpes-like virus, and we also think that one of the reasons why it's spreading so strongly through the Caribbean, it's driven probably by warming sea surface temperatures. Next slide, please. This is a video. And then this video here, it's the thorn in all of our lives, is the sargassum invasion. Are you guys going to talk about sargassum too? A little bit? Well, then I won't steal your thunder again. But sargassum it's native to the Caribbean, so it is found. But because of increased nutrient load, because of warmer sea surface temperature, it has been really invading the wider Caribbean region and has really been an issue. Fishing boats are not able to leave the dock because there's so much seagrass. It starts to rot, etc., etc. It is a mess. But Jan will talk a little bit more about it. Next slide, please. You can skip this one. This is just me having too much fun. Of course, we are also physically involved in restoration. I think restoration, unfortunately, takes up a lot of our time, but it's an important part of our work. And here, what we're doing is we're growing coral in coral trees so that we can outplant them onto the reef. So there's awesome restoration projects done on Bonaire, but all of the other islands also have their own dedicated coral reef restoration programs. Next slide, please. This is the rattlesnake that I mentioned. This is the cascabel, which is an endemic species of rattlesnake only found in Aruba. And one of the issues that Aruba has been dealing with is the use of ATVs or UTVs in the national areas, in the national park, with the result of significant impact on their native snake population. Next slide, please. This slide I use often to highlight the importance of area conservation, protected areas, why protected areas are so important. And I tell people, they were like, why do you have, focus so much in terms of nature conservation and nature protection, focus specifically on protected areas. And then I usually use this slide to highlight what the impact a protected area has. This was a study that we did in 2017. Luckily, we did this study. We started the study before Hurricane Irma in 2017, and we were also able to gather data after Hurricane Irma. And it shows that if you look at biomass, it shows that in 2016, the blue is herbivores, the orange. I'm colorblind, so I'm not even sure if it's orange, but the other color is carnivores. And it shows that there is a significant difference between the biomass in a protected area after a hurricane and the biomass in non-protected areas after a hurricane. And it also shows that protected areas can assist in the repopulation of areas outside of those protected areas. So, when I talk to fishermen, they were like, yeah, you established a marine park, so we're not able to fish in those zones anymore. And I was like, a fish is not going to be like, I'm going to stick around into this area and not go outside. So this is a slide that I used to highlight the fact that, excuse me, that biomass is really critical, critically supported through well-run and well-managed marine protected areas. Next slide, please. But there is some bad news. One of them is a disparity for support of nature conservation. Unfortunately, this is a slide that I also showed in a meeting with parliamentarians a couple of months ago in the Netherlands. And it shows that LNV, which is the Ministry for the Environment in the Netherlands, they have a budget, if you do the breakdown, it's about €277 per hectare dedicated to nature conservation in the Netherlands. If you look at Caribbean Netherlands, so Bonaire, Saba, and St. Eustatius, which since 2010 are special municipalities of the Netherlands, that budget goes to 65 cents to €4.6 per hectare. But if you look at St. Martin, Curacao, and Aruba, there's exactly 0.0 support from the Netherlands going to nature conservation on those islands. Next slide. And this is unfortunate because many of the treaties and the agreements that are in place that the Kingdom of the Netherlands are signatory to, they're not really being followed up. So, Jan and I had a meeting with the gentleman that is responsible for the climate change department in the Netherlands, and he didn't even realize what sargassum or coral bleaching was. So, we really want to highlight the importance that, we need increased support in the Caribbean, that biodiversity hotspot. We need more support on a higher level from the Netherlands to make that realize, to realize those nature conservation goals. But, when people ask me, what is the one thing that worries you, what concerns you the most, my reply usually is the impacts of climate change. There is not enough investment, not enough focus being done on what those impacts will be for us that have to deal with it in our daily lives in the Dutch Caribbean. So I think that's it. Next slide. Yeah, that's just to emphasize the parliamentarians in the Netherlands that's the one ask. And that's it. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be eagerly awaiting your questions at the end of the session.
Well, thank you so much, Tachio. And I'm relieved to see that I'm not the only one sweating here. It's Marseille, it's nice, but except when you have to present. Thank you so much for this very clear overview of the richness and the beauty of the nature and the biodiversity at these islands, at this part of our kingdom that I must say we're very proud to have as part, to be able to say that we have these types of special biodiversity. And also you made it very clear how important it is to conserve it and how tedious it is and even more challenging than at many other places within our kingdom. So thank you very much for demonstrating this. And we now, like I announced, we will zoom in on one of the islands, the island of Bonaire. And it's a pleasure to invite Mr. Jan van der Ploeg, the director of STINAPA, who will take us, I think, to the island of Bonaire and its beauties. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Koenraad, for these kind words. My name is Jan van der Ploeg. I'm the director of STINAPA, the National Parks Foundation on Bonaire. I'm very pleased and privileged to be here and to see such a full room of people. So let me thank first of all IUCN Netherlands for the invitation and for organizing this, Tazio and the DCNA for making this possible. And I specifically want to thank our Lieutenant Governor Edison Reina for being here and giving a very strong signal about how important conservation is for the island. Your presence is very much valued by everyone in our organization in DCNA, but also, as we all know, on the island. So thanks very much, Edison, for you being here. I would like to say a few words on Bonaire and on our organization. I will keep it short. Don't worry, it's Caribbean night, so there are some drinks afterwards. After me, my colleague Roxanne will say a few words, and then we will have plenty of time, of course, to relax and really talk about life in the Caribbean. Next slide, please. STINAPA is an independent, non-for-profit organization mandated by the island government to protect the island's protected areas. We are responsible for 2 large protected areas, the Bonaire National Marine Park, Tazio mentioned it already, and Washington Slagbaai National Park. And I will say a couple of things today about these parks and also about the challenges we face as protected area managers. The Lieutenant Governor already highlighted the issue. We have protected areas on the island, but that covers a significant part, but much more of the island, which is of high value conservation areas, is classified in the spatial development plan as nature and is therefore also has a protected status. So Bonaire has 34% of the area falls under the classification nature and thereby meets the criteria of the 30 by 30, which is the 30 by 30 initiatives, and as such can be seen as an example that it is in fact possible to protect such a significant amount of land and sea. 100% of the marine areas of the island are formally protected. So really, really an example for the world, I think. Next slide, please. Just to give you an impression, this is the Washington Slagbaai Park, founded in 1969. Rox will say more about this important dry forest area. Large, one of the oldest and one of the largest terrestrial parks in the Dutch Caribbean. Next slide, please. I will focus more on our marine park, the Bonaire National Marine Park, which is about 4,000 hectares. It encompasses the uninhabited island of Klein Bonaire, which is an important sea turtle nesting site. It also encompasses Lac Bay, which is a large shallow water bay, which has a lot of mangroves and seagrass meadows. So ecologically a very important part. All coral reefs of the island are covered by the Bonaire National Marine Park, a significant area. The park is one of the cornerstones of the Bonairean economy. Bonaire is known as a diver's paradise. Many tourists, most tourists come to the island to dive, and therefore the marine park is really important for the island. Next slide. The Lieutenant Governor already mentioned it. The coral reefs on the island are in relatively good health, are relatively resilient. And that is because, or is the result of several protection measures that were taken in the 1960s and early 1970s. A ban on killing sea turtles, a ban on spearfishing, a ban on anchoring, very basic measures that were implemented already 40 years ago and that have resulted in one of the best reefs in the Caribbean. This is an interesting graph from an article, recent article by Bob Stanek and colleagues who compared the reefs from Bonaire with other areas in the Caribbean. And you can see that Bonaire is actually, you can compare Bonaire to the Caribbean reefs 40 years ago. So there is still a lot to fight for and a lot to be proud of as well. Next slide. Tadzio already mentioned it, but all our conservation efforts on the island are funded by user fees. We have a very innovative and sustainable finance model in which the most tourists pay their access fee and entry fee, and thereby we can sustain all conservation action of our organizations, but of many other organizations as well. We have, as TINAP, about 40 staff, and it's good to realize that whole conservation system is funded by tourists through the user fee. The Dutch government is not contributing significantly to our conservation efforts on the island yet. Next slide, please. Let me say a few things about threats and current issues on the island. Tadzio already highlighted a few. This is a report issued last year. It highlights the conservation priorities of our island. And it highlights also that despite all the good efforts, a lot still needs to be done. And I think on Bonaire, what we are seeing is an interesting situation in which the island was effective in dealing with direct threats, proximate causes of the decline of particularly coral reefs. But we are now coping with new, novel, complex threats, more indirect threats as well, which protected area managers like our organization, but also the island government cannot solve completely by ourselves. We need help. Bonaire needs help. And I think that is my main message. I will illustrate it a little bit with 4 short examples. Next slide, please. Sargassum is really one of those examples. Sargassum is a seaweed that influxes our beaches. This is Lac Bay, where you can see that the sargassum is being pushed into the mangroves, is suffocating the seagrass meadows, and we are facing serious impacts because of this rotten seaweed. Apart from the threats for biodiversity, there are also public health issues. There's a large impact on the tourism industry, obviously. So this is really a major problem for the island. Next slide. We are forced to basically clean it up by hand. And that has been the situation over the past years. These are our rangers. And the situation is very straightforward. Last year, we have been manually cleaning up several beaches. It places a huge burden on our staff, on our volunteers. This is not fun work to do in the sun. And despite efforts from Stinapa, but also from the island government to get additional support from the Netherlands to at least provide us with the necessary equipment, we have unfortunately not yet received any support. So also next year, unfortunately, it's very likely that we have to clean up the sargassum manually. Next slide. Another example of where we need help as protected area as a protected area management organization, an example of the issue that kind of transcends our park is the water quality. Bonaire has since a few years a sewage system, but there remain a lot of septic tanks that are leaking. The infrastructure is problematic. So during a rain, there's a lot of sediment flowing directly into the sea. Drainage remains a major issue. And clearly those problems are much bigger than a simple marine protected area manager can address by him or herself. This requires a much more integrated approach from a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of different governments. Next slide. Third example deals with coastal development, also a huge threat at the moment. Since 2010, when Bonaire became a special municipality of the Netherlands, there has been a major boom in economic activities. A lot of new hotels are being constructed. We see that there are other tourists coming to the island who are not so much or not only interested in nature, but also would like to lay on the beach. So there's a huge boom in the construction of artificial beaches, which is highly problematic because they have a huge impact on our reefs. It turns out to be very difficult to address this and to tackle this problem as the island government. We see also a new type of entrepreneurs coming to the island, mainly Dutch entrepreneurs who are maybe not so much attached to the island, but are trying to make quick money as soon as possible. So it brings me to the final issue, the issue of law enforcement. Next slide. And here we also are dealing with nowadays with entrepreneurs who are actively trying to seek the holes in existing island legislation, unfortunately. So we see more and more entrepreneurs who are building artificial beaches without necessary permits or are trying to push the limits of what they can do. On the island, we lack the capacity and the expertise to effectively address those issues. And it's another example of where we need much more support from the national government. We face as protected area managers the issue of can be very effective in talking with a fisherman who is using a spear. We can confiscate their spear, we can confiscate their fish. But catching the big fish turns out to be much more complicated, as you can all imagine. This is not different in the Netherlands or wherever we find ourselves in. And here again, we need a much better coordinated effort to address these complex issues. Last slide. What I would like to highlight, and I think that echoes also the message of our Lieutenant Governor, is that Bonaire cannot do it all by itself. We have taken major steps, the island, way back already in the 1960s. We have been leading marine conservation efforts in the Caribbean for a long time. But right now, what we see is that there are new complex threats coming towards us that are much more difficult to address by ourselves. We are doing everything we can on the island in cooperation with the island government, but, and this is my personal opinion, I think, and that's already highlighted also a little bit, I think that the Dutch government needs and should do much more to support the islands. There was an interesting article a few weeks ago, a few months ago already, in a magazine on the island, in which Lieutenant Governor Reina mentioned we should talk a little bit, The Hague, the government in the national government in The Hague should talk a little bit less about Bonaire, but more with Bonaire. And I think that message resounds very well on the islands. There we can achieve so much together, but we need much more active support to build the capacity and expertise on the island to address these complex problems. With this message, I'd like to end. Thank you very much for your time and for your presence here. And please save your questions for afterwards with an open forum or under the drinks. Koenraad, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. And we go straight to, we stay on the island of Bonaire, which we have just seen is wonderful. And we learn more about the challenges on land. Roxanne, Francesca, hand the floor to you.
All right, thank you. I think everybody's ready for drinks, so I'm gonna keep it short and quick. If you have any, if you do have any questions, please feel free to find us afterwards. I can talk about this for very long, so let's just keep it short. I am going to be talking about Bonaire's tropical dry forest. Bonaire, just like Aruba and Curacao, has the main forest type we have is a tropical dry forest, and tropical dry forests might not be as sexy as the rainforests, but they are equally as important. And they are, more importantly, they are more threatened. So if we were to talk about threatened forest types, the tropical dry forest is the most threatened forest type on in the tropical areas. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So we have quite a few invasive species in the Caribbean. These are some of the invasive mammals we are dealing with. They have various impacts on nature. Of course, the goats and the donkeys. I will be talking about those a lot more. But we also have problems with cats. We have pigs. St. Martin has the dubious honor of having monkeys. Not a problem I would want to deal with personally. I think I'd rather stick to the goats. Next slide, please. So Jan already mentioned this. We have a nature and environmental policy plan that was made for the island of Bonaire, Ceiba, and Statia. This plan was made including stakeholder consultation of various local NGOs, nature managers, people who know about the island. And in this plan, they highlighted a couple of strategic goals. And strategic goals 1 and 2 directly relate to Bonaire's goat problem. So strategic goal 1 is about reversing coral reef degradation. A large part of that is erosion. The goats eat all the plants. All the soil ends up in the water. So that is one of the aspects that we want to deal with. And then the other goal is about restoring and conserving unique habitats like the tropical dry forest, but also protecting it for all the species that live in these forests. I'm going to take this off. All right. Next, thank you. So Bonaire has started a goat eradication program, and this is echoing a program that was done in the Christoffel Park in the late 1970s, where they did manage to remove the vast majority of the goats. And in a matter of 2 decades, they saw amazing restoration of the tropical dry forest. So we know this can work. It allows us to protect vulnerable habitat for endemic species like the sable palms, which are found nowhere else except on the islands. And it also allows us to have the forest ecosystem recovered. Next slide, please. So I'm going to skip a lot of these slides so that we can all go drink. This is where Bonaire is. We've seen it before. Next. This is our island. The island is about 288 square kilometers, has about 21,000 inhabitants, and our park is located in the north of the island. Next slide, please. It is, as Lieutenant Governor Reina mentioned, the oldest protected sanctuary of the Dutch Caribbean. It's made up of 2 old plantations. So the southern part of the park is called Plantation Slagbij, and the northern part of the park is called Plantation Washington. And our goat project right now is primarily focusing on the plantation of Slagbij. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when you all come to Bonaire and visit our park, these are some of the landscapes you will be able to see. We have amazing geological formations. There are really beautiful reefs. Next slide, please. We also have sea turtle nesting beaches inside the park. Next slide, please. A huge variety of plants. There are about 63 different species that have been recorded in the Washington Slagbij Park. We have 3 different types of candle cacti, which are really important for the bats and our local parrot populations. Next slide, please. And of course, the park is also important for cultural, historical, and recreational uses. So one of Bonaire's most popular beaches is Slakbay Beach, which is located in our park. So when we're talking about protecting the park, of course, we're protecting the nature values, but we're also protecting the cultural and the historical resources we have inside of our park. Next slide, please. If anybody is really, really keen on the history of Bonaire and how it was settled and then colonized, come find me afterwards. I will tell you all about it, but for now, we're just gonna skip it. Our problem on Bonaire really starts in the year 1529, when this man, who was the governor of the Spanish colonies, decided that he wanted to have goats on the island. So they brought goats over. A lot of the land was destroyed to create room for plantations. And Bonaire, of course, my favorite animal, a lot of the land that was on Bonaire was destroyed to make room for plantations. Now, of course, these plantations supplied Curacao and Europe with a variety of items. We had salt production that happened inside the park. We had divi pods. These are seeds that were exported to the Netherlands. Charcoal was made, aloe was made, and of course, the wood was also exported. The majority of the trees that grow in a tropical dry forest are really slow growing, but it's also really hard wood, which makes it really good for building ships, but also means it takes a really long time for it to regenerate. Next slide, please. So in 1965, there was a biologist, Stoffers, who did a landscape ecological assessment of the island of Bonaire, as well as Curacao, Ceiba, Aruba, and I think Statia. And what he did was he looked at all the different types of vegetations you could find on the island and gave them a score. How healthy were they? And then in 2005, this study was repeated. What they found during this study was that in Christoffel Park, where they removed the goats in the 1970s, the vegetation had improved. In Bonaire, the southern end of the island, so this part, the vegetation got worse. In some places, it stayed the same. And in the Washington Park, which has been managed by Stinapa, and we have done some kind of goat removal over the history of the park, some of the vegetation had actually improved. What they did also say was that Curacao had the best vegetation, Aruba had the worst vegetation. They also have an invasive species problem, predominantly goats, and Bonaire was kind of in the middle. Next slide, please. So what we did at the park was we wanted to establish our own in-house monitoring program to track what is happening with our vegetation. So in the Slakbay plantation, which is this part down here, we set up 24 plots. And in these plots, we measured and counted every single plant. A lot of those were prickly pear cacti. I do not know if you know these cacti. I don't have a picture of them. They hurt like hell. But what we found was that the majority of the plots were dominated by only 5 or 6 different species of plants, which is of course not ideal. And if we look at the entire park, all of this is just cacti, and not the kind of cacti that is beneficial for the parrots and beneficial for the bats. It is the kind of cacti that spreads because of habitat degradation. A very small percentage of it was actually the trees, every single tree species that you can think of that we can find in a park. But the majority of the park is just cactus, which is of course not ideal. And this is what we want to try and reverse with the goat removal project. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, the park is of course home to a whole lot of different types of animals and plants who really depend on the tropical dry forests. And tropical dry forests are already very threatened. We have in our hands now the ability to save some of the last remaining tropical dry forests on the planet, which is in the Washington Slakbay National Park. So we have the goat removal project, which has been running for about 10 years on and off, but has really been kicked into high gear over the last 2 years. This project is being run by my colleague, Paulo, who couldn't be here, unfortunately. And next slide, please. So what his goal is, and what Stinapa's goal is, and he has to realize, is the complete removal of invasive species from the Washington Slakbay Park. So right now we're focusing predominantly on goats, but we do also have donkeys, we do also have pigs, we have cats, we probably have rats. So there is a whole host of invasive species that are having an impact on our nature that we need to deal with. Now, complicating factor here is that goats are culturally important. They are an iconic species. I grew up eating goats. That's you grew up eating goats. Goats are really important for the local population, the local culture. So when we are talking about the removal of goats, we have also, of course, a very big outreach component and a very big communication component where we want to highlight to people why we are doing this, but also include them in the removal. Next slide, please. So we have local teams that work with us to capture goats, and the goats they capture, they get to keep, they can sell them, they can use them for animal husbandry. In this way, we hope to contribute to the livelihoods and the economical empowerment of the people of Bonaire. Because we recognize that goats are very important for the culture, and we recognize that this is a little bit of a thorny issue. But we also want to highlight that nature conservation doesn't always only have to cost money. Nature conservation can provide jobs. Nature conservation can help improve people's livelihoods. So we have different teams who work with different methods to capture the goats, which we will get to on the next slide. Thank you. So the Slakbay plantation, which is where we are removing the goats right now, is an area of about 1,900 hectares. And in this area, we estimate there are about 3,500 goats. Well, probably less now because we removed a few of them. And we're doing various removal methods. So the teams we work with that are part of the local community, they mostly remove the goats alive. So they do live trapping using traditional methods, traditional hunting methods to remove the goats. They are actually the ones who have removed the vast majority of the goats from the park. So if you look at all the goats we removed, I think about 80 to 90% of the goats were removed by the local community, and all the revenue, all the benefits from those goats stays with them. We also do ground shooting. This is for the more difficult goats. You know, it surprised me, but goats are incredibly smart. If you don't catch them the first time, you're probably not going to catch them again. So some goats who manage to escape from the traps, if they escape more than twice, you're probably never going to be able to catch that goat. There are also goats that are in places that are just too remote and too inaccessible for people to get to, because again, our park is a lot of cacti. The underbrush is really thick, so it's really difficult to maneuver. So we do also do ground shooting, and the idea is to also use Judas goats to assist us. So because we need to be able to know where the goats are going, how they're moving, there are special spy goats, let's say, that get outfitted with a really nice collar that tells us where they're going. And this way we hope to use this information to better be able to corral and especially capture those last few remaining goats. So of course, this is a really big project to undertake. So we started in a pilot area that is this, I don't know what color you would call that, magenta. This area right here, that area alone is 8% of the goats of the park. In this area, we have, next slide, please. Yes, so to be able to track the goats and their movements, we also use trap cameras. Here you can see some of the water traps we also use. So we really use a very diverse suite of methods to be able to capture the goats. Helps us because then they never get used to just one method, keeps them stupid for a little bit longer, making it easier for us to catch them. Next slide, please. So we work with there are 5 teams of people removing the goats from the park. 4 of the teams are local teams. So those are people who live in Rincon, or which is the oldest village in Bonaire. And then we have this Tinapa in-house team that also removes the goats. In 2020, we removed 545 goats. This year, between January and about August, we've already removed 1,078 goats. That means that for this year, we're very close to removing more goats than are added each year. So we want to remove about 30 to 40% of the population in any given year to make sure that the population is going down. And if you look at the methods that we use, so all of these are, the ground shooting is about 190 goats that we removed by ground shooting, and everything else was removed alive. all of those goats, we don't keep them, we don't sell them, we give them to people and then they can use them for whatever they want. Next slide, please. So in this 8% area, the pilot area, the magenta colored one, we have so far removed 116 goats, and we think there are about 6 goats remaining. But we've already started to see some really encouraging signs, let's say, from this particular area. So this area took us almost a year to get to the 116 goats. We hope from the lessons we've learned, of course, when we go to the following areas, it becomes a lot easier. But what we have seen so far is that in the pilot area, we are seeing a lot more baby plants. So if we look at the amount of seedlings that we can find in our plots in 2021 compared to before we started removing the goats, we can already see there was almost 1,500 extra seedlings. Of course, this year and last year, we did get a lot of rain. So we have to factor that in as well, in what is happening with the vegetation. So we compared the pilot area with an area outside. And if we look at the outside area, we also see more seedlings in that area, but inside our pilot area, we see relatively a whole lot more. Now, there are other things happening that I cannot explain yet because it's only the first year that we have removed the goats. We have seen in the pilot area that a lot of the adult trees died. So we are going to be keeping an eye on the situation to see how things develop in the future. Next slide, please. Last slide. So for the future, we are of course going to continue removing the goats, and we're also going to tackle the other invasives. We want to do a lot more monitoring. A lot is not known about tropical dry forests. They are not very sexy. They're not very interesting. So we don't know a lot about the soil chemistry, the insect populations in the park. All of these are things that we want to be able to look at better in the future. And of course, we're going to keep monitoring how the vegetation changes over the coming years. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. First of all, we already announced that there will be questions, or room for questions afterwards to all of the speakers. Perhaps, are there any questions through the YouTube channel? There are not. So I think we can take 1 or 2 questions. And please, if you would like to have a question, you can use the microphone here. And you can state your name and to whom you are addressing the question to. Anybody? Particular question? This point? Yes, please. Sir, the microphone here. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Hans de Jong from the Netherlands. Maybe a question about the removal of goats. I didn't hear the removal of donkeys, but I was approached some time ago by an NGO about a theory that the donkeys on Bonaire, forgive me if I'm mistaken, that genetically they belong to the original wild population of donkeys in Somalia. Do you have any information on that story?
I do not. So I've also heard this theory. There was genetic testing done on the donkeys in Bonaire a while back, but I've never seen the results. So I don't know.
It's undisclosed.
No.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing? Please allow me, Koenraad. The good thing about these conferences is that you run into really unexpected people. I started my conservation career supervised by Dr. Hans de Jong. Hans de Jong has been working in East Africa and West Africa and in Indonesia for a long time on elephants and manatees. The connection is grazing, so it's clear that Hans knows something about overgrazing. But that's really nice to meet such people. Hans has been very instrumental for IUCN Netherlands and has been a source of inspiration for a generation of conservationists in the Netherlands, but also in Indonesia and in Africa. It's wonderful to see you here, Hans, and thanks for being present. Forgive me for this interruption.
Here. And perhaps even more important, the chair of a valued member of IUCN in the Netherlands, the Leo Foundation. Any more questions? I don't see it. Oh, here we go. Is this through YouTube? Oh, here we go.
Well, I'm not only a IT guy, but also a forest conservationist myself, and I have a question for Roxanne. You remove the goats, but you use passive restoration as the tool for the dry forest regrowth. Do you also use active restoration, such as tree seedling planting and other things?
So not yet. This is the first year that we are doing the removal. The idea is to look at how the passive restoration goes, and if we see indications that active restoration is also needed, then we will proceed to also do that. But for now, we want to look more at passive restoration. So there's other islands where they've removed the goats. One example, famous example, is Redonda, where they didn't do any restoration, and in 15 years, the population or the vegetation recovered by itself.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the speakers. Please, thank you again, everybody. And thank you all for being here at this wonderful evening where we learned so much about nature conservation of this very special part of our kingdom. Thanks all the people in the YouTube, and thanks all the people here. A last request to the people here. Due to the corona regulations, we are supposed to take your names as being part of this session. So please, a list for your name will be passed. I'd also like to point out that there's a QR code that you can scan on the back of your seat. If you do this, we get your information and we will send you a link on the recording of this session. So thank you very much. Yes, suddenly break in.
There are 2 questions on YouTube. Do you want to read them or shall we skip them?
Well, I think the people in YouTube deserve time as well. So first of all, we have a question of Stacy McDonald. How is Bonaire planning to provide more content to the concept of blue destination? We'll ask that question to the Lieutenant Governor. And there's a question of Paulo Bertuo, if I pronounce it correctly, probably not. There is any other invasive species on the marine park? Is there any invasive species? If yes, what species and how Stinapa has been dealing with it? Would that be for Jan? Oh, would be for Roxanne. So maybe first a question about how Bonaire is planning to provide more content to the concept of blue destination.
Yes, thank you for the question. Our Island Council and also the Executive Council of Bonaire has been discussing this matter of a blue destination for a while. As I mentioned, we as Executive Council of Bonaire has started with this, and we have to give it content through research and also advices that we get from different kinds of institutions and people who know more about this, and we help us with that. We hope within a couple of months before the next year to come with a more detailed content of the blue destination that we want to put on Bonaire. But it's, as I mentioned, it started and we're going in that way, and that's a decision taken by Island Executive Council, so that this is the way future for tourism on our island.
Thank you so much. Roxanne, the floor is yours again.
To answer Paulo's question, no, I know the question. To answer Paulo's question, no, we have no other invasives in the marine park. Bonaire has a lionfish. I wouldn't call it a problem right now because the lionfish invasion has been handled quite well on Bonaire. We set in place, or there was a strategy presented before the first lionfish were recorded on the island. And as soon as the lionfish were recorded and present on the island, we started an eradication program, or well, a control program, because we will never be able to get rid of all of them. in which we involve the local dive community in helping us to control the population of lionfish. So we have modified spear guns that you need to live on island, have a cedula, take a course and register to be able to use. And with these modified spear guns, you can then go and hunt lionfish. What makes this project very successful is that lionfish is a high value fish. So if you catch a kilo of lionfish, you clean it, you can sell it for about $50 per kilo. And that is, of course, motivating the local hunters to keep going out, as well as helping us to keep our reef ecosystems healthy. Our lieutenant governor is actually a very avid lionfish hunter and goes hunting quite often with Paulo, who poses this question.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you all on YouTube for posing the questions and being active. And I've already thanked you all. It's time for drinks. It's time for the rest of the Caribbean night. Thank you all.